welcome back to your Tropical Podcast, where you hang out with us, Shannon and Leonard. Just two dudes hanging out, talking about things we'd like to share and talk about. Today is a normal day. There's no Vanessa, there's no third party, it's just the two of us, Leonard and I. And today is actually a topic that I feel like Leonard is passionate, very passionate, quite passionate about. Similar to last week where Vanessa talks about K-pop and all things about K-pop from her fandom. We will talk about SCP today, which is Leonard's fandom for the time being. And I think, yeah, so Leonard will briefly explain to you guys what it is, because I personally don't really know what it is about too, even though I read some stuff about it. I've even like watched a show about it, but still empties my mind. I still don't get it, the whole concept of it. So that's where we're gonna, dive in and discuss it further. But before we do, just a quick how are yous once again. From a scale of 1 to 10, how are you, Leonard, this week, today?
I think 6 or 7.
Wow.
I think it's fine because like my
Ooh.
mountain trip got canceled, and then I have to go next week instead. So it's like delayed.
So is it a good thing or is it a bad thing?
It depends on when you look at it, because like I don't mind going, but I always get like
Oh,
seasick
yeah.
because
I
the
know what you
way
mean.
yeah.
Yep. All right. Yeah, so if you guys hear this from here on out, Leonard's going to the mountains next week
Look
to
at
go
mountain
and live his best farming life with his family.
and pick out like chilies and shit.
Yep. All right. Well, to me, I'm also the same. I was about to say I'm a 7 because a lot of things have happened actually. Particularly yesterday, I had such a good day yesterday. Just wanted to share with you and Leonard. Leonard, um, I need to tell you something. So I bought Fruity Pebbles cereal.
What?
It's like an American cereal. It's like colorful cereal, and it has a picture of
Apples?
Flintstones in the front. But that one's not important. It was important. I mean, it's quite important because like I bought it for like 30% off. But yeah, that's great
Okay.
and all. But I bought Pop Tarts. I've never tried Pop Tarts. Have you?
Try them either.
Yeah, so they sell it by my supermarket store here, right? And then
Uh,
like I remember wanting to buy it, but it was so it is very expensive since it's imported from US. So what I did was on January, sometime around January, like last January or last December, I saw the boxes, right? And I was like, oh, expiry date in August. I expect it will be on discount near August. And then yesterday, when I was about to come back from the office for my work, my mom was like, "Can you stop by the supermarket to buy 6 pairs?" And then I bought 12 pairs. And then I was like, "I'm gonna check on my Pop Tarts and see whether it's there, like whether it's on discount, right?" Turns out, when I was about to buy my cereal and my 12 pairs, I saw the corner of my eyes. I saw like something that says 50% off all in this section right here that's stickered. And then I was like, "Holy shit, I see the Pop Tart. I see it." And then I took it and then I bought it for like 60,000. I bought it and I was so excited because like this is my first time trying it out. And then I tasted it just now and it didn't taste that good, honestly. I didn't bake it yet. I just ate it as is and it didn't really taste as good. Just really taste more of like, yeah, it just tastes like confectionery. So to me, it was like, okay, I guess. But I'm planning to heat it up tomorrow at Yehez's place. Maybe
see
it'll taste
and see
better.
what all the hullabaloo is all about.
Yes, I will let you know. But so far, it just tastes like sugar pops.
Okay.
But I'm pleased because I finally get to taste Pop Tarts for the first time in my life. Anyway, we'll now move on to our SCP, the crux of our discussion today. So,
Yes.
yeah, without further ado, please, Leonard, go on with your SCP rant slash
Yes.
passion
Uh,
speech.
passion speech. So for those who don't know what SCP is, SCP stands for Secure, Contain, and Protect. And
Right.
in the lore definition, the SCP Foundation is basically a secret like organization that's sole job is to secure dangerous
Mm-hmm.
anomalous objects or anything that contains the anomalous properties,
Yep.
protect them and the people uh, from those anomalous objects, from
Yep.
themselves or from the people, and
Mm-hmm.
then and contain them. Like basically store them in these like secret organized like in these secret facilities essentially.
Yep. You see, I never knew that. I actually thought it was just like, to be honest, I
Huh?
mean, I just always thought that it was just a website that was like creepypasta. Like creepypasta can just
Yeah.
post
Yeah.
stories, right?
And you wouldn't be particularly like wrong regarding that because SCP
Mm.
technically, the way I understand it at least, it's kind of like a
Mm.
subgenre of a creepypasta.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, yep, yep. If so, if I were to just cut it through, like hit it on the dot right now,
Mhm.
can I ask whether SCP is actually real or not? Like, is it based on real stories?
Oh
Is
no,
it
no,
a recount or is it just
obviously.
fiction all around?
No, no, it's fictional. It's all fiction.
Also, all of it is fiction. I mean, all of
All
it.
of it is fictional. Yeah.
Oh, okay, 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 okay. Go
But of
on.
course, like the idea is like you have to believe technically it's like real or something. You
Yeah,
know?
it's some sort of
Yeah.
like a cultish kind of like engagement, right?
Yeah, yeah, almost, yeah. Because
Yeah,
like
yeah,
in the website that you mentioned, like the SCP website, for
yeah,
example,
yeah, yeah,
the primary authors, like the
yeah,
people who decide which stories get into which SCP or so on and so forth,
yeah,
they're considered like the high-ranking members of the SCP Foundation or something like that. Yeah, so that's the in-lore like universe definition or understanding of what an SCP Foundation is. So
yeah.
they basically contain, protect, secure, and analyze or trying to understand objects, life form, phenomena, locations, even concepts. There's like some like basically anything
That
that
might endanger the society, is it?
yeah, no, no, it doesn't have to be a threat per se, but like it could be anything that shows weird anomalous properties. And by anomalous,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and what we mean by anomalous is anything that breaks the laws of physics or biology or anything like for that
Or
matter.
even common sense, right?
Yeah, or just common sense. Yeah. For
Yeah.
example, like a cake that self-replicates or a lizard that can't be
Oh.
killed.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I think you did mention some sort of like, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm
Mm.
wrong, but like SCP has like some sort of categories where like there's harmful, there's harmless, right? And then there's like
Yeah,
questionable,
yeah.
something like that.
I'll get into that. So
Yep.
like I explained, so SCP is basically like almost a subgenre of creepypasta, and it mostly started out in 4chan.
Yep.
Yeah. So someone in 4chan basically posted in the like paranormal forums of 4chan, and
Okay.
and it gave birth to the very first SCP style document, quote
Mhm.
unquote. Because
It's not Slenderman, right?
no, no, it's not Slenderman. Because the
Okay.
thing about the
Good.
SCP is that if you notice, if you go to the website and read any of the SCP like
Mm-hmm.
documents, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
always written in a certain format,
Yep.
right? So they're always written in like they like you have to tell the description, the containment procedures for these particular SCP, any addendums like notes. Like basically, you have to write them almost like an actual official document.
Report.
Like, yeah, like
Yep.
a
Yep.
report,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
And and this could be anything from yeah. So like I mentioned, yeah, there's like usually the containment procedures, what categories they placed in. So the common categories are safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Euclid, Keter, there's Aphelion, there's yeah, those are the most common ones, and they
Oh,
don't
okay.
actually
Mm-hmm.
because what you think was like when you hear those categories, you thought it was like, oh, how dangerous they are, right?
Yeah, kind of. I thought it was more of like a genre of like what they look like, or maybe where they stem from, you know. Like maybe for example, like Euclid is like some sort of creature, and then the other
Oh
one is
yeah,
more
yeah.
of like
Okay, that's fair enough.
location. Is
Yeah,
like that?
but actually, that's not a particularly accurate way to say to explain what the categories do. So what the actual categories do is they're basically telling them how they react once contained. If that makes sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. That's
So
interesting.
so safe, for example, the one I mentioned, right?
Yep. Yep.
There's something called the box test,
Mm-hmm.
and the way and basically the box test allows you to understand, or at least kind of see how certain SCPs get their categories. So safe, for
Yep.
example, safe is that if you put it in a box, if you put this SCP inside the box, inside containment procedures, right?
Yep.
If nothing happens to the box, if you leave it behind and nothing happens,
Yep.
it contains it's safe. It's considered safe.
Sorry, sorry, but what is the box again?
So the box is anything that allows you to contain the SCP.
The box is anything that allows you
So
to contain. Oh, okay.
it could be
Makes
an
sense. Like
actual box. It could be a
or a
room.
jar.
It could be a method. Like
Okay, okay.
there's one SCP that has to be tortured constantly in order for it to not
What?
destroy the world. Yeah. So there's like weird things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the box is basically that anything that contains the SCP from breaking loose or causing
Yep.
havoc and so on and
And,
so
and
forth.
and this is basically the one of the categories called safe. So
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's whether it if it's safe, it means that it doesn't react to the box, right? To the
Yeah. If
way
you
it's
put it
being
inside the
contained.
box and then you look away or you leave it behind and nothing
Mm-hmm.
happens, it's
It's safe.
considered safe. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
If you put the SCP inside a box and you leave it behind and you don't know what's going to happen, or
And
you
it,
at the very least expect something unpredictable to happen, it's
yep.
considered Euclid.
Oh, okay. So it's either
Yes.
safe or Euclid is basically what you're saying. It's the
There's a lot
spectrum.
more. There's another one called Keter, for example.
What is Keter?
Keter is basically if you put the SCP inside the box and it destroys the box if you leave it behind. It's considered
Okay.
Keter.
Wait. Okay. So Euclid is something of more of like no, because what I'm trying to get around is it kind of like a spectrum or is it just like a random kind of like it's not connected to each other?
No, they're not. Yeah, they're not connected to each other. They're all independent technically.
Oh, okay. So there's no spectrum of like
There's no
this one
spectrum. You
is
you
safe.
you
Okay.
you see something and you basically think that it's either safe, Euclid, or Keter, depending on how
Okay.
you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
there's also two more. The
Mm-hmm.
two more standard one, which is Thaumiel. Uh,
Thaumiel.
yeah, Thaumiel means
Okay.
if the SCP is the box, it's considered Thaumiel. So if the
Oh,
SCP
yeah.
itself contains another SCP, it's considered Thaumiel.
So if for example you have a SCP that's a box
Mm-hmm.
who is also who
That
can
allows.
torture that SCP that if gets tortured will not ruin the world. That's a Thaumiel, right?
Yeah, that's
That
considered a
box.
Thaumiel. Yeah, yeah, that box.
Alright, makes sense. Yep, okay.
And then the other one is Neutralized, which is basically an SCP that no longer shows anomalous property or has been destroyed, essentially.
So it doesn't exist. It ceased to exist, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, they're either dead, destroyed, or like completely no longer shows like anomalous properties.
Oh, so like if the box doesn't do it anymore and it just becomes a normal box, then that's considered neutralized, right?
Yeah, that's neutralized. It's no
Oh,
longer
okay.
working for some odd
Okay.
reason. Yep.
Okay. Makes
So those
sense.
are the
Okay.
categories. Yeah. Those
Okay.
are the main ones. So and then again, like that's so they have like certain formats, like
Mhm.
again, object class, containment
Mhm.
procedure, the
Mhm.
description.
Mhm.
If you're lucky, sometimes they have like images of the SCP itself.
Oh, oh yeah, I remember now. And these are made by like individuals or
Yeah,
groups, right?
yeah, they're written
Yep.
usually by individuals, usually
Mm.
by like one or two person who's interested in in the like like in
Mm-hmm.
writing something very interesting.
You must have like a really, really imaginative or like a twisted, warped brain to actually create or concoct something so like interesting like that, yeah. Because I don't think I could ever write one like SCP
I
in the back
mean,
of
I
my head.
think eventually if you keep uh reading it, you might be able to like get
Oh,
inspired or something like that. Because yeah,
yeah,
there's a
true.
lot of crazy ones. So
Yeah,
the ones
yeah,
I'll give as a short example. So like let's cover like each SCPs, for example, like each of the
sure,
category of SCP. So we'll
sure.
start with safe, for example. I think there's one called the skeleton key or something that basically opens. I think it's SCP-005. So it's a
Okay.
safe SCP. By what it means is that if you put it anywhere, it doesn't do anything. Like it actually doesn't, like, unless directed upon or like act like someone is actually holding it or something, nothing will happen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yep. Okay.
that's one example. And then the most popular one, SCP-173.
Mm-hmm.
Some nickname him as Peanut because the way he looks.
Okay.
Yeah. So SCP-173 is basically this like structure, like almost statue, made out of
Okay.
concrete and rebar,
Okay.
right? And and this SCP, I might add, is considered Euclid.
Should I be
Which,
searching that? Wait, let me
if
search
you
it
want,
up.
go ahead. I mean,
What is it
if
called?
you,
SC. Wait. Is it scary? Because if it's scary, I might be too chicken.
it's a little
Like,
creepy, I guess. I don't think it's
oh
scary.
dear.
None of the ones I mentioned is gonna be scary by any
Okay. But if I have a
manner.
nightmare, you will be accountable. I'm kidding.
Again,
SCP-173, is it?
yeah, 173.
Let me see. Let me
I
see.
might add as well.
Jesus Christ!
Why is it scary?
Fuck!
Is that scary?
To me, it was
Oh, okay.
scary.
My
Oh
bad.
my lord. Oh my
Yeah,
lord. I am not gonna have good sleep tonight. Oh god,
yeah.
Jesus
So
Christ.
SCP-173 is basically this structure, like statue that's
Fuck.
made out of concrete and rebar, and as you can see, it's like somewhat
Oh,
spray painted in some way. Now, the reason why it's considered
no.
Euclid is because when you don't act upon it, when when it's inside a box, when it's inside a containment, like as you can see, it's inside like a
Yeah,
few room of a few meters, right?
yeah, yeah.
Uh, like you don't know what's gonna do because the reason for that is because it has a special property.
What does
Um,
it do?
SCP-173 is, even though it's basically a statue, it can move and it's
Uh,
incredibly fast. It moves like basically almost light speed. It's this thing,
okay.
and it only
What?
moves when you don't
Why?
look at it.
Why is its butt black? Like,
That's because for some reason it also produces like
no.
blood and feces down on the
Oh
floor of
my
the containment room.
god.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Jesus Christ. Okay.
and basically, whenever the room gets too dirty, three people have to enter the room, and two people must
Mhm.
maintain eye contact with SCP-173 at all times.
But the problem is, is it
Mhm.
dangerous? Like, is that thing dangerous? Because like,
Yes, yes, it's
if
completely hostile.
oh, it's hostile.
It's hostile to human life.
So if you look away, it will come after your ass.
Yeah, it will snap your neck
Jesus
or
Christ.
strangle you one way or another.
But okay, if I look away and then they come and get me, and then I look at it again, will it stop moving or it will still come after me?
It will stop moving as long as you maintain eye contact. It will not move.
Oh, but it moves so fast that maybe when by the time I look back, my neck is already snapped. That's basically
Yeah,
what
the
you're
moment
saying.
you blink, if it's within, if that thing is inside the room with you
Yep.
and you blink, you're basically dead. You're probably already dead.
Yep.
So that's an example of a Euclid one. Because again, if you put it inside a box and you don't look at it, you don't know what's gonna happen, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's Euclid. And then another one is Keter. Is SCP-682.
This is a Euclid.
This is a Keter. Keter. So
Uh,
if
uh,
you put this inside a box, it basically
it
tries to
will.
destroy the box.
Oh, okay, the box, but not you, right? Or is it also harmful? It could also be
Also,
harmful, that's what I'm saying.
it's also harmful to you, yes.
Okay, but can I ask whether not all SCPs are harmful, right?
No, not all SCPs are harmful.
So,
That's a good
so
point to
you
make.
can, yeah, so you can be Euclid and not harmful, and you also can be
Keter and
Keter
not
and not
too
harmful,
harmful. That's
right?
pretty rare. It's a
I mean,
it's
think of it
really
this way.
rare.
Think of it this way. When it comes to SCP-173, just now the peanut one, if
Mm.
you looked away and it didn't come after your ass, but it just goes around like making sorts of like fart noises that smells like shit, because it
Yeah,
looks like shit.
technically it's not harmful, but no, oh
But
no, sorry. If Euclid, yes. Euclid is
Oh, but
fine. Yeah, but
right.
Keter, on the other hand, the one who tries to destroy the box, the majority of them tends to be hostile to humans and
I
any living
see.
life for that matter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, it's possible. Yeah, in general, it should be destroyable. It should be destructive to humans as well.
Yes.
Okay. Then for safe, can you actually be can an SCP be safe but also harmful? I think it can be, right?
Yes, it
Why not?
can. Yep, can.
Okay.
That's definitely possible.
Okay. So what
As
was
because
this
the thing
SCP?
is that the classification for safe is basically anything that if you put in a box and nothing happens,
Right.
right? So
I
it
mean,
means
if
if
nothing
it's out
happens
in
to
a
the
box,
reaction,
yeah, it
yeah.
could be dangerous. Yeah.
Oh, but I was thinking like if it doesn't do anything in the box, but when you actually reach out to it, it triggers something. Then that would still mean that it's safe, but it's harmful, right?
Uh, Technically that counts as Euclid.
But you do something to it.
Oh, as in you're inside the
Oh,
room with it and you're trying to like activate or something. Yeah.
oh, yeah, something like that.
Then I think it's safe. Yeah,
So
it's safe
so
in that case.
it's safe, right? So like I'm saying, it's something to do like. Wait a minute. No. I don't think it's safe then. What's the definition of Euclid again? Sorry.
As Euclid is basically if you put it inside a box,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know what's going to happen to it.
Oh, then you're right. You can't be safe and not harmful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because if you're safe, then it's safe because you know that nothing happens, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't be Euclid, and I mean you can't be safe and harmful.
Like
All right.
you can be safe and harmful to some degree. For example, one example of this is SCP 504,
Mhm.
504, which is
Mhm.
called I think nicknamed to like unfunny tomatoes or critical tomatoes.
Yep. Is it scary?
No, it's not scary by any means. In fact, if you
Oh,
if you read the description, it's kind of funny. It's
okay.
basically tomatoes that so it's a plant. It's a tomato plant, right?
Uh-huh.
And if you make a joke, if you make like a bad punny joke next to
The
it,
laugh.
no, it will launch a
Okay.
tomato at you.
Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah, but
Oh,
it's
that's
not
actually
completely
cute.
cute because apparently, if I'm mistaken, the worse your joke is, the more dangerous they become. Like to the point where it actually decapitated someone or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
So
see.
that's because that particular SCP is considered safe. Because if you don't
Yeah,
do
I would
anything
think
to
it's
it,
safe. Yeah.
yeah. Because if you don't do anything to it, it's not gonna do anything.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But there's kind of like a for me, I'm kind of still a bit confused here with the gray area between safe and Euclid, but
Okay.
safe. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? But I think if I can get it correctly, it means that like Euclid is more of like how they react to the room, right?
Yes, like you don't know what's going to happen if you leave it behind, essentially.
Yeah.
Like for
Okay. Okay.
example, for example the aforementioned tomatoes, if you leave it behind, nothing's gonna happen because it only activates when you make a bad joke.
Right. But then with the SCP-173, it's Euclid because when you leave it behind, they can do anything. Is it?
Yeah, because there's no eye contact made onto that SCP, so you have no idea what it's doing inside that
Ah,
room.
that's where it was. Okay. Now
Yeah.
I see it. Yeah, I see the category now. Yep. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. But harmful versus not harmful is basically how it reacts to you, right, as a person, not the room, right? Because I
Yes.
feel like there's a different like for me, I feel like a distinction needs to be made between room and person.
Uh-huh.
I just want to clarify because like I'm afraid that I might get it wrong.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, okay, understood. So, for Keter, what was the SCP you were gonna talk about?
SCP-682,
Is it
otherwise
scary?
known as the hard to destroy lizard or
Is it
hard to
scary?
destroy reptile.
Is it scary?
Uh, I don't know, dude. Like, I can't gauge it because to me, 173 is like just not scary at all, but it's scary to you, so I can't judge
Okay,
it.
is it as scary as 173?
It's basically, I'll describe it, but the photo that they use for this particular SCP is basically
A
a,
lizard.
like a, it's not a direct lizard. It's like a gigantic, oversized crocodile skeleton with
Ah,
melted bits on top of it.
fuck. Okay, I'm gonna check it out. Oh,
682.
okay, it's not too bad.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
really
So
weird. I'm scared of 173, but not 682.
maybe because 173 looks unnatural and 682 is actually like something
Yeah,
you can actually see. Maybe.
maybe. Yeah, you're right. You're
Maybe.
right. Cause,
Yep.
'cause it just looks like a normal crocodile, but just kind of burnt up or like disintegrated. But then 173 is like fucking nightmare. But
Yeah.
okay, go on.
So
So,
SCP-682 is Keter, and the description of this is it's considered a like completely danger to all life, not just human.
oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this thing is a consider because based on what we know about it is that it hates life. It's capable of communication. It can actually talk.
Okay.
It can talk like it's actually intelligent, like as in it can talk to humans and stuff like that. And but it
Mm-hmm.
hates us for some reason. It hates all form of life.
Okay, so how do you contain it then? If that
You can't. That's why it's
happens.
considered Keter. It tries to escape at any given time and tries to kill anything it sees.
So right now, currently,
Mhm.
if it's being kept, how do you keep it? Like what is the protocol
So
or something like that?
their method of containment, because the thing is that the reason why it's called hard to destroy a reptile is
Mm-hmm.
because no method of conventional weaponry like fire, bullets, or anything like that
Mm-hmm.
can destroy it for some reason because it has like very powerful regenerative abilities and so on and so forth, like resilience,
Mm-hmm.
blah 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 here
Mm-hmm.
and there. Um, and the only way for the like foundation to contain this is to basically throw this thing into a bath of hydrochloric acid and just constantly melt its skin off.
Oh, it looks that way not because of how they not because it's natural. It's because of us, is it? Because we put acid on
Um,
them.
I think if I'm mistaken, it is, and at the same time, like the melted bit, I think it's because of this acid. So it looks that way
Oh.
because of like us trying to burn its skin off constantly. Otherwise, it'll just regenerate.
Yeah. So you're basically saying it's because of us that it looks like torn off and shit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But it does affect, as in like it does get him like pain or does it I mean like if we're pouring acid on it, it means that it's working, right? Like it's
Yeah.
causing it pain.
hmm
Okay, maybe that's why it hates us.
I mean, the story is that he was discovered like basically killing farmers. So that's like
Mm-hmm.
the main story about it, and we constantly ask him questions like, why did you kill those farmers? And he doesn't really want to talk to us.
Okay.
And like when we and like his only reply of his like the reason for him killing those farmers because he considers the farmers looking disgusting or something like that.
So what does he do? Like how does he destroy the places or the people the things around him?
He's just like
Like
this creature with like high strength, speed, and reflexes. Like this is one of the examples of a poorly written SCP, despite how popular it is. Because I consider this like a poorly written one, because it's basically very powerful, intelligent, super strong, like unstoppable monster type of
mm-hmm,
story.
mm-hmm,
And so he's considered a little bit boring by some people, but at the same time he's like one of the most popular ones. So essentially, anytime
mm-hmm.
he tries to maintain like breach containment, he basically tries to escape by either because hydrochloric eventually neutralizes, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
just burn off the skin constantly. So if you don't pay attention to it, he'll escape, he'll kill you, he'll kill everyone inside a facility. And from what we know, the only way to stop him from escaping a facility is basically to nuke it or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean like so it doesn't I don't know because I think I assumed that like he was some sort of like radioactive alligator or crocodile
Yeah.
so like around him tries is he ends up disintegrating people near him or something like that. But
Oh
no,
no
you're
no no!
just
He just eats
saying
them. He just kills them like
he just
conventionally.
thrashes around is what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yep.
He literally destroys it physically, you know.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And then the next one?
Um. And then there's I have to double check whether this SCP counts as Thaumiel because, like I said, I'm gonna cover like again the different SCP, right? So an extension to SCP-682. There's another SCP called SCP-53.
Is it a girl? Is it a little girl?
Yes, I think you can see this in some of the arts that you mentioned.
God, yeah,
If you
I
look at
did,
too.
but I didn't want to think, and it's not scary, right?
No, no, no,
It's
she's
just a
not.
girl.
So She's basically like a very small child, like 3-year-old kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And her anomalous property is that whenever anyone, like any adults that's over the age of 3, make eye contact with her or touch her or
Mm-hmm.
even stay around her for like long periods of time, they become like paranoid and homicidal. Basically, they like their number one thing whenever they're around her is that they want to kill her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no. They want to kill her, just
Yeah, they
her.
want to kill her. So if you're near SCP-53 for a very long time, um, you'll start feeling like you want to kill SCP-53. But her other anomalous property is that eventually that person will suffer heart attacks or seizures and die afterward, after doing any damage to SCP-53. And she'll recover from any wounds that you deal to her.
I see. And then how is she a Thaumiel to? Wait. Okay, so if she's not a Thaumiel, what is she right now? So
She's
she's
currently
basically
Euclid.
safe. Oh, oh, Euclid.
Considered Euclid, yes.
Why
Because
is she Euclid?
the reason why she's considered Euclid or is because any person that's within her, because like people have to watch over her, right? She can't
Right.
just be put inside a box forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like especially like she needs to still be given food and shit like that. So
Yeah.
like if you leave that box behind without supervision and people just try to feed her willy nilly without like understanding what she is,
Mm-hmm.
she can become Euclid essentially. She can become dangerous and weird things can happen.
So basically, she's Thaumiel because of 0682, right?
Yes, she can be considered Thaumiel due to to 682.
Why?
Um
Is it because when he goes near her, he doesn't feel so homicidal and or even if he does, like he wants to hit her, but he self-inflicts damage on himself because of her? Is that it or what?
um so from I think from the documents that we like if you read from her and so on and so forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
For some reason 682 will like see her
Mm-hmm.
and just like I think if I remember correctly, yeah.
Yep.
Like I don't know the 100% like description of what happened exactly, but like 682 would like want to kill her. Like he would start wanting to attack her first, stop,
Mm-hmm.
get confused, if I remember correctly,
Mm-hmm.
and then like would just not move afterwards, like stop reacting to her.
Oh, is it because maybe arguably it's because he doesn't even have an age, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, like we don't understand at all. It's just like one of those things that they're written for lore.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we have no idea why this happens. So S682 would like just lower himself to the ground, um, and eventually once SCP-53 interacts with SCP-682, she
Yeah.
would like play around with him, like drawing things on his back, uh, like hugs him, so on and so forth.
Yeah, like a kid in a
Yeah, like a
way.
kid essentially. Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's also like the fact that like any future attempts of making 682 interact with SCP-53, 682 will go on a rampage. He does not want to do that, but like SCP-53 will always want to do that again, essentially.
Oh, he doesn't want to.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be with her, but she always asks for him again, like as a friend or something.
But why does he? Whoa, that's weird. Or maybe it's
Yeah,
because he also doesn't understand. Maybe he's like, maybe six eight is just like, what the fuck? Like maybe he feels powerless when it's with her, cause like somehow she has power over him in a way, you know.
maybe could be. Like we don't know.
Okay.
Like there's so many theories that you can think of. Maybe it's because like maybe 682 understand that killing 53 would kill him.
Yep, yep,
That's
yep.
also one theory. Maybe SCP-53 has other anomalous properties that we don't know or something like that. There's like so many different theories. And that's kind of like what's so fun about the SCP universe.
Uh-huh.
There's a good video made by a channel called the Tales Foundry.
Yeah, what's that?
From my understanding, their channel consists mostly of like understanding literary tools, like how certain writers do things, like horror draw like writers,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
world
Oh,
building.
they touched on SCP, is it?
Yeah, they touched on SCP a little bit and like getting confused, like because some people don't really understand SCP, and that makes sense. It's a tough like community to get into, especially with all the text and like things that you have to read, things that you have to understand.
Yeah.
There's so many different like what I call it, like little lores between each SCPs and like the universe. Like I haven't even gotten to the deeper things like the Church of the Broken God, the different organizations other than SCP, but we're not gonna get into that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
confused. But yeah,
it's
go
super
on.
because like you're already confused just from like the categories and stuff like that. Can you imagine like the
Yeah,
larger things? Yeah.
yeah.
But the SCP, but there's this very good video made by the Tales Foundry where basically the idea of the SCPs in general, like how they're written, is
Uh-huh.
kind of paradoxical in nature.
What do you mean? Like how? How is
Because
it
like every
paradoxical?
story has like a beginning or end, right? So like you read the story, you're intrigued by it, you want to know more, and you want to see how it ends.
Yeah.
Or like you wanna gain a better understanding of the literary material that you have in front of you, right?
Yep. Correct.
But the idea of SCP is that there is no answer, and you will never get one. You will never get an answer.
Hmm.
Like every SCP that you read, they're all weird in its own self. They just exist in this lore, and there's nothing like nothing significant
Yeah.
about them other than the fact that they're hidden in this secret like facility, right?
Yep. 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 I guess I think I get what it means. Like I mean it's kind of like self-contained in a way. Like funnily enough, it's self-contained the stories.
Yeah, even though some of them still like what do you call it, mix a little of like a few of them mix between each other, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I get. I mean, I guess that's what happens if it's fiction, right? I mean, you can't do. I mean, there's just so little things that you can do to actually make it happen for real. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But I guess like you said, like I think I get what your point is. Basically, narrative wise, in normal story or like normal books or whatever, usually there's like some sort of a plot to it, right? There's an
Yeah,
ending
like
and
even in creepy pastas for some reason,
yeah,
like for
there's a
example the
plot. Yeah,
Slender
you're right.
Man,
You're right.
there's always
Uh-huh.
like some form of like plot, right? Like some kind of a side
Yeah,
plot.
yeah. This one is more of just like it exists. That's all. As
It
in like a
exists and
zoo.
yeah,
Yeah.
it exists
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter. It's like you just have to accept the fact that this fucking thing exists.
Yeah. 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 True. 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 Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what for me personally, that's kind of what made SCP fun. It's just like there's all these weird mysterious like fantastical things
Right.
that just makes you feel like invested into it to some degree, even though there's no like actual story or anything that you get into.
Mm-hmm.
There's always like little tidbits in here and there that just makes you feel like, oh, this world is actually quite wide, quite lived in.
Right. But wouldn't you say that it's also the community that kind of makes you feel some sort of like involved or engaged
Oh yeah,
in
definitely, yeah. There's a lot of like, cause back when I started like reading a lot of SCP stuff,
Mm.
um, it's like there wasn't any good way for me to consume it like in a mainstream manner. Like you actually have to read a lot of things. You have to read a lot of short stories. You have to read a lot of SCPs to just get like when you read one SCP, there'll be like a side addendum or side story to another SCP, and
Oh
then you
yeah
have to
yeah
understand
yeah
that
yeah
SCPs and so on and so forth. So
yeah
it can get quite difficult. Like for example, the 682 one,
and the
right?
053
And
right
053. That's not written in the actual what do you call it? That's it's not written
in the text right
in the text. You have to kind of find that in the short stories. There's also another like SCP called SCP-106, I think, if I'm mistaken.
oh no
Called
I
the
think
Old
I know
Man.
is it like the one crying in the corner or something like that
No. That's Shy Guy.
it's the
That's
one
96 or something.
right
Yes.
is it scary the 106
Yes, I recommend you do not. if you really do not want to get nightmare fuel, this is the one I highly recommend you don't
The
look
old
into.
man.
The
The
old
old
man,
man
yeah,
one. Okay,
yeah,
I am not going. It's like fucking almost 11 p.m. here. We are
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
doing that today.
We're not,
I
yeah, yes.
I have had enough nightmares for 1 week. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I
So
am not.
SCP, yeah. So SCP-106 is probably the like the one I personally felt like, because this is the one that has like a pretty good extensive story.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the old man, um, like I'm just gonna give like a TLDR of what this SCP is. It's a Keter,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, right? So
Oh,
basically,
okay.
yeah, it's a Keter SCP, and the reason for this is because it's basically impossible to contain this guy. Anything you try to contain, like anything you want to use to try to contain this person or
Uh-huh.
this thing, it will be able to melt that material away in a few time, like
So this
long periods of time.
so this old man can melt stuff in a long time.
Yeah, it basically gives like this rot, like it basically rot anything.
Oh. So it's not melting as in like it's hot. It's like decay is what you're
Yeah, it's like
saying.
a decay. So
Okay. So
a
like
lot of people.
mm-hmm.
What? Sorry.
I was about to say it's like a radioactive old man walking around,
Yeah,
just
essentially.
decaying.
But the thing is that even non-organic things rot in his presence, essentially.
Or like metal
Yeah,
or
like metal
leather.
can rot and looks like as if there's like mucus or blood coming out
Yo.
of it. Yeah.
Okay. Go on.
So yeah, essentially it's very like essentially it's impossible to contain this guy. He kills things or people by pulling them into like his pocket dimension,
Yeah.
and he tortures them, kills them in there, and yeah, and this is the reason why I really don't want you to look
Wait,
up
what?
his.
He brings you to his pocket dimension.
Yes, like in this in so he creates like this hole on the wall or on the floor,
Uh-huh.
and he can pull you into that hole,
Okay.
and no one knows what like what he does when you're inside that hole. But when you get out, you're basically like you yourself, you're like the person that's being pulled,
Uh-huh.
like looks rotten all over the place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But this one is basically he does it to you.
yeah, he does it to basically anything that's feeling pain. So he's basically like almost, imagine like the most sadistic human being. This is what that is with like superpowers. This is what
Okay.
SCP-106 is, and he basically just kills people who are already in the midst of suffering, like dying or like in serious injury or pain. He basically hunts them down and pulls
What
them into
about
the dimension.
what about like suffering as in like sadness or
Yeah, those
depression?
two. Yeah, those two as well. Because there's like one short story. Like I said, this particular SCP-106 has a lot of like different short stories that's
Subplots,
accompanied.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For
Oh.
example, my favorite one of him is a exploration of his how he became to be.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a document called The Young Man, contrary to his name, The Old Man. So
I think this is what he was what he was before, how he
yeah,
became.
yeah, yeah. So some people say like he was supposed to be this lieutenant in World War II or something that gone missing.
Uh-huh.
But before he went missing, he killed a bunch of people or something like that. That's one idea.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there's like a lot of different short stories that accompanies this particular SCP, and that's like one of the cool things about SCP. It's like there's like these short stories. There's like the main articles themselves, are like main
Yep.
documents.
Yep.
Multiple
Yep.
propositions, like for example SCP-001.
Is that
The
scary?
um So SCP-001 is kind of hard to explain. It's not a single SCP. It's like multiple SCP being proposed. If that makes any sense.
Proposed.
Yeah.
What
So
is that mean?
so for SCP-001, there's like the Gate Guardian proposal, which is basically like do you know the Garden of Eden, right?
Garden of Eden,
Yeah, the
yes.
Garden of Eden. There's supposed to be like there's supposed to be two guardians or something that
Yeah.
that protects the Garden of Eden, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, apparently one of the guardian is like disappeared, and only one guardian is left.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that guardian is considered as like SCP-001 or something. That's like a proposal for
The
001.
missing one?
Yeah, no, the one that's currently still guarding the Gate of Eden.
Oh, okay.
Another proposal is something called the sheaf of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like this huge stack of papers, right?
Yep.
There's a huge stack of paper, and they're all like basically face down, so you can't see what's on the paper itself.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take one sheet of paper, and then you look at it, an SCP is created.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. That was pretty interesting. That was
yeah, that
like
one.
it's like kind of like birthing SCPs, right?
Yeah, there's like a lot of like those kind of proposals. So again, like in SCP, nothing is canon, but at the same time, everything is canon.
Yep, yep,
It's kind of weird in that sense. Yeah.
yep, yep.
Like you can
Okay.
you can basically take bits and pieces of what you like. I was like, oh, I like this bits of like this story, so I'll take this
Yeah.
one. I don't like this one, so I'm not gonna include that, so on and so forth.
So what about the Garden of Eden one? Is that what SCP is that? SCP, what is that?
That's also
SCP-00.
SCP-001. It's a proposal for it at least.
Well, yeah, okay. Just though I think going back, you said like a lot of like proposal. What does proposal even mean?
Proposal is basically a lot of people are saying like what do I call it like a lot of authors are basically saying like this should be something called SCP-001, but no one can agree. So they basically take like they just put it all down.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So it's basically like a placeholder. Zero
Yeah, like a
SCP-001 is a
placeholder for like
placeholder.
a bunch of different stories that's people consider very interesting. So like for example, the Sheaf of Paper one, the Gate Guardian one,
Right, right.
uh there's like they're all usually named in like the or like in very
Yeah,
ominous sounding names like When Day Breaks, God's Blind Spot, the
yeah.
Factory. Like the Factory is very simple. It's just a factory that constantly creates new SCPs. Um,
Yep, yep.
like the database, or yeah, I think the database, which is like this computer in a secret facility where it contains all um like all existing SCPs or something like that, which is the website itself technically.
Right. No,
Yeah,
that's why I think it's kind of but I think it's kind of weird. It's kind of, like you said, it's proposal. So there's a lot of ideas right into it.
yeah,
But these creators they don't want to actually make another S they don't want to name those ideas as another SCP number. They wanted to make it as SCP-001 is what you're saying.
yeah. And these are just like like people thinks like these are just good enough for them to consider. Oh, these are like really good stories and like
For SCP-00. I mean, like, what I'm saying
zero
is,
zero
I
one.
can just make up another SCP and I can make it as another, like, SCP-00, whatever. But
Yeah.
everybody is trying to fight for this
I don't know if fight
SCP-001
is the right
title.
word. It's just that the community just likes these ideas and just say, hey, why not just give this like 001? I generally don't know the primary
Mm,
story behind 001 and why there's so many of them. But I do,
mm,
from what I know, it's basically like a bunch of different authors either
mm.
proposing to be 001 or basically the community saying, hey, these stories are good enough to be SCP-001. Yeah, because like one of the most famous one is called When Day Breaks. I don't recommend you looking into it up, but you can read it if you want to.
No, I don't think I will now. But maybe tomorrow morning.
Yeah,
I I don't want nightmares.
or you could like look at the like an explanation for it. But
Is
like
it
I'll just spoil it a
scary?
little bit. It's basically a proposal of an end of the world scenario, essentially.
End of world
Yeah,
scenario.
end of the world scenario. Basically the sun itself has become an SCP,
Yeah.
and it will melt every living organism on Earth.
Oh, okay. I think
Yeah,
that's not that bad.
and the thing is that when you get melted by when day breaks, you don't die. You just get melted and merge with other organic substances around you.
Ew,
Yeah. I mean, I'm explaining like the technical plot of When Day Breaks, but I highly recommend you read it because it's quite depressing. It's like probably the most depressing science fiction stories I've ever read in a long time. Like
Yeah.
other than maybe I Have No Mouth, but therefore I Must Scream or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. The concept is interesting, and I mean, it makes sense. But it's just to me, I guess to me, it's just kind of interesting that this kind of story, people don't like people didn't decide to make like another SCP for it. You know what I'm saying? Like
Oh
naming it
yeah,
as
yeah, yeah.
another SCP,
SCP.
but they wanted to make it SCP-001. I just find that kind of intriguing because it's like, that means it's like in a way it's like kind of like a special kind of, it's like a, I'm not saying it's special in the sense that it's special. I mean to say it's like it's so catered to the idea of SCP-001, even though SCP-001 in itself does not have any like
Yeah.
specification. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, yep, yep.
Like it's just basically like a dish. You make a dish. You could just name it as anything else, but no, people are like fond of the idea that it's this particular dish name instead. You know?
Yes.
Oh, okay, but that means whatever ideas or whatever story that's been kind of like mutually or you what is it majorly agreed by the community to become SCP-001. Can there's a lot, right?
Once, yeah, there's the one that I mentioned. Yep.
So for example, with the things that you've mentioned, I think you've mentioned three so far, right? There's the When the Day Breaks, there's the Archangel, not Archangel, sorry. There's
The
the
Gate Guardian.
Garden of Eden one, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
the, what was the other one? I forgot. Oh fuck, you said something. I just forgot.
Sheet of papers or
Right,
database.
the sheet of
Yeah.
paper ones. So what you're saying is these three can actually exist at the same time, and then basically other SCPs can connect with it as if it's like it's the SCP-001, even though there are others as well. Is what you're saying, is it?
Yes. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay, now I'm kind of like, see, now my brain is kind of wrapping it around. Like, oh, okay, I now I understand what you mean by like it's not canon, but it's canon, and it's
Yeah, because
also
like you can take any bits and
self-contained.
pieces. Like the most famous one is also the Scarlet King, which is
Mm.
a lot of people consider to be the primary antagonist of the SCP lore. Like essentially
Really?
every like the SCP Foundation, like the Scarlet King is the biggest enemy of the SCP Foundation.
Mm-mm.
Because every bad, like almost like evil creatures that the SCP Foundation have is usually connected to the Scarlet King one way or another.
I
Like for
see. Okay.
example,
Okay.
SCP-682, the unkillable lizard one.
Oh yeah, eight six
Yeah,
two.
there's a short story basically saying that it's one of the children of the Scarlet King or something.
Oh, okay, I see. But okay, now then I have a question then.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, oh, this why that essay person on YouTube said that it's paradoxical? Is it because I was about to ask you, if that's the case, would it be possible for another story to have the idea that it's not related to the king at all?
Yep, that's possible.
And that's why it's paradoxical, is it? Because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel
Like
like,
some people
uh,
don't like the fact that like they're using that for the Scarlet King theory or story, and you can do that.
right.
You can accept the fact that like it's maybe part or not part of the lore.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of like choose your own, like choose your lower path is what is
Yeah, yeah,
what is what
exactly.
you're
Yeah,
saying it, right? But at the same time, it's like, for example, if I were in the situation of like I'm for the king and the 068, I mean 6862 relating to each other, but you're not. We could still connect with 862, but we're not gonna connect with with the relationship with the king, is what you're saying, right?
yeah, yeah. You can do that if you want to.
I
Like I
see.
said,
Okay.
that's why nothing is canon, but at the same time, everything is not.
Yeah, yeah, and then why it's paradoxical in a sense that like it's
The
self-contained.
paradoxical bit is just like the nature of the SCP itself. It like not necessarily connecting to the lore, but yeah,
The nature of the SCP itself? What do you mean?
like because the thing is that if you look at any of the SCP articles,
Right.
they don't actually answer anything, right? So that's the
Oh, okay. Yeah,
paradoxical
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that one is like paradoxical
Because it
narrative,
feels like
right?
fantasy, but it's written in
Yep,
a
yep,
like a scientific literal
yep, yep,
literate form.
yep, yep.
Um, but at the same time, if you can't call it sci-fi because there's like all these weird anomaly thing that basically
Yeah,
breaks
yeah.
science
I think
fiction.
because that's why I think in the very beginning I remember asking you, is it like sciencey? And you said not really, and I was like, what the
Yeah,
fuck?
and it's like you can't call it science, you can't call it what do I call it? You can't call it science fiction, you can't really call it fantasy. It's like
Yeah,
somewhere
yeah.
in between.
I think yeah, okay. I think I get what you mean by paradoxical in terms of the nature, but at the same time also in terms of its like branches, like how it correlates to each other. It's also it can be considered as paradoxical, right?
Yeah,
Because
you
like you
can.
said, there's one
Yeah,
story where it links, there's one story where it doesn't. Which like
yeah, yeah,
if you're just a surface level reader like I am, for example, I'd be fucking confused because I'd be like, one says this, one says that, what? But for you, you think like, oh, it's just normal.
yeah. It's just normal because I'm used to this. I've seen like I've read tons of these where I was like, yeah, okay, fine, sure, that's a
Yeah,
short
yeah.
story.
Okay, I think that's interesting to say the least. I mean, it's a cool concept, and I think that's what makes it a bit different than creepypasta, I guess. Now I can see it, because creepypasta, they don't try to link each story by each other, right? If I'm not
Yeah,
wrong.
and to be fair,
Creepypasta is
SCP
going
doesn't
themselves.
really do it either because like I said, it depends on the person. Do you want to connect this person, this SCP to another SCP or to another story? That's up to you.
But you have to write it down, right? Is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Or is it like,
if you put it inside, like let's say you're trying to write a short story for SCP, yeah, you should write it down. Like you should yeah.
oh, okay. Oh, but if I were to think of it of myself, it's still possible, is what you're
Yeah, it's
saying.
fine. You can even add like an entirely new SCP just for like your
Yeah,
weird
yeah.
ass story that you want to tell. You know,
So if
it's
I were if for example I were to link that old man, the
yeah,
scary old man six
SCP-106.
oh
Yep.
106
Mm-hmm.
and the alligator 862, it's still possible,
Yeah, you can do
right?
that.
Like,
Yep, yep, yep.
okay, makes sense.
Because
Okay.
like I think there was an idea of like trying to um
Mm.
because like so you mentioned the guy that was hiding in a corner. That's called Shy Guy, right? SCP-96, I think.
Yeah, I briefly saw it in one of the results and I was like, that's scary, a bit creepy.
Yeah, so SCP-96 is called Shy Guy, which is like and his shtick is basically if you look at him or if you look at any photos of him,
Mm-hmm.
he will chase you down to the ends of the earth until he can kill you. If you
I,
ever see his face, essentially.
but I did see him.
Yeah, yeah,
What
no,
happened?
that's yeah. But yeah,
Shit! If I die tonight, yeah.
so that's
Uh,
and there's a story where they basically try to because like I mentioned about 682 and the fact that like the existence of SCP-682 is a danger to all humanity, right?
yeah, yeah.
So they try to neutralize 682, and one of the ways they do that is basically pitting 682 against 96. That's like one of the short
Mm-hmm.
stories where they
Mm-hmm.
basically say, "Hey, 682, look at 96 face." So 96 will usually want to kill whoever it is that looked at him, right?
Right.
Yeah, but since they're both indestructible, since 682 cannot kill 96 and 96 can't kill
Yeah. What
682, they
happens?
just
Do they get team
basically
together?
beat each other until they basically start like get exhausted essentially.
Oh, but they can't kill each other, so it's just literally just hitting each other.
Yeah, to the point where they're like exhausted. They don't want to fight anymore. Mm.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So there's like
Huh.
start or you yeah, but like that's one of the stories, but you could also just accept that me, I don't want that to ever exist. Like
Yeah, as
I
in
don't
you
want
don't
that to
want them
ever
to ever
happen.
meet.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
ignore
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, okay. I guess why. Yeah, I guess why. I guess now I understand a little bit of why it's kind of like why it's kind of endearing to some people, to say the least. Like for you at least, like I get why you think this is like very, what is it, indulging in a way.
Yes.
All right. So I think moving on from that, like, do you have anything else you want to talk about? Because actually wanted to move on and I wanted to ask you about like maybe one or two stories, your best stories that you've read so far or that you've known of so far. But if not, if you have other things you want to add on first, you can go on first.
Uh I think I might just mention like if you have very bad attention span and you think that you can't read like you can't read through
Mm,
like tons and tons of text in like a short period of time,
yeah.
There's a few channels in YouTube. A lot of content creators that's make SCP a lot more accessible.
Oh, okay. I get what you. Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, if you don't like to read or you don't like the lore, like reading the lore all by yourself, there are some YouTube channels who can like make it concise or like try to summarize it for you, right? Or
Yes.
explain it to you in a better light. Yeah, okay. I get what.
Yep. So there's one called the Volgun,
Okay. Okay.
VOLGUN. Like I said, I'm probably gonna
Yeah, I
add
think you can
add
edit
some of the YouTube
the
channels later on
yep, yep, yep.
um in the description of the video. But
Mhm.
the Volgun is basically the SCP websites. Like he basically takes the one that seems interesting
Yep.
and like read through it. So you can listen to it like a podcast or like a audiobook
Oh.
essentially. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's a bit,
And
but
he
for me, I feel it's a bit spooky because it's like kind of yeah. It depends on the story
yeah,
he picks.
it depends on the story and it depends on the person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like the Volgun basically acts out a character. So he acts as one of the almost like a lecturer of the SCP
Mhm.
Foundation.
Mhm.
So he basically talks to you, the audience, in the video, like a
Mhm.
as if you were one of the staff of
Mm.
the SCP Foundation.
Mm.
So that's one thing. That's one channel that I mentioned. Another mention is the one I found out recently is uh, SCP Animated
Mhm.
or SCP Tales. I think. Let me double check.
Is it?
SCP Animated Tales from the Foundation. So this is a very
Mhm.
new channel, relatively new one at least, where they
Oh, okay.
yeah, this is a relatively new channel where they basically make animations
The stories.
of the stories or even the main SCP themselves. Like for example, the one I mentioned is the Young Man,
Yes.
right? The Young Man, the 106's sub story.
Yep.
That's covered here. When Day Breaks, the one I mentioned.
We covered here.
The one of the proposal that's also
Mhm.
in there. Like they basically does like animated short stories of them. So that's another one that I would recommend. Another one is the one I actually showed you, I think, called by Lord Bung.
Yeah, actually, that was what I was about to tell you. Like, if since you're gonna like make a list out of it, I was gonna tell you we should also include that YouTube channel because I
Yeah.
feel like that was the only exposure to SCP that I got out of all the things that I've known about SCP. And
Mm-hmm.
even but to be honest, like as someone who's not even involved in SCP, as someone who couldn't really care less about like finding out what SCP was really about until now, watching Lord Bung, is it? Lord Bung's video?
Yeah, Lord Bung.
Like it didn't feel like an SCP kind of thing for me. I guess like for me it's more of like the style made it so much more interesting that it ended up making me interested in what SCP was. Or at least the ones they were covering.
Yes, because his presentation. So if like again, I'll explain a little bit about the channel. So
Yeah.
what Lord
Well,
Bung does when it comes to the SCP lore is
mm.
that he basically makes almost like this episodic
Yep,
story
yep.
about one like a main character basically interacting with different
The
SCPs.
SCPs.
Yeah,
Yep, 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 yep. So it's this
and
guy who can die, right? He just regenerates or something
yeah,
like
he
that.
himself is an SCP. So for those who don't know, the
Right,
main character
right.
in the show himself is an SCP, and his
Mhm.
shtick is that he can't die. And he just basically respawns like a video game character.
Yeah. So he's sent out to like face all the SCPs since he can't die anyway.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
also one thing I forgot to mention completely is that the reason why the Foundation knows a lot about the SCP that like for
Mm-hmm.
example that they recorded, so like they know all this information is because they experimented on the SCP by throwing in what the Foundation calls D classes.
D class?
Yeah, D class are basically people who are on death row. So they're basically
Oh,
criminals
prisoners
or
of
people
state.
or missing people who just basically wants to die or so on and so forth.
Yep, yep,
And
yep,
they
yep.
basically makes them as D classes.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically throw these D class to interact with the SCPs.
Yep, yep.
So
I
that
think
like for
I think that.
example, like and Connor himself, the main character in the
Yeah.
SCP shown by Lord Bang, he himself
Mm.
is technically a D class as well.
Yep.
It's just an immortal one. So yeah, that's something
Oh, so he's
interesting
a
to mention.
convict as well? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't know
think
he
he's
was a...
supposed to be a convict based on the uniform that he wears.
Right. Oh, yeah, but I
Yeah.
thought it was like everyone wears that. Even if, like, for example, you're depressed, you want to kill yourself,
Oh no no no
you
no.
wear that
You're if
too.
you're D class, that's what you wear, basically.
Yeah. So basically, whether you're a convict or not, you'd wear that. You know what I'm
Yeah, yeah.
saying?
You're a D class, like basically someone who the Foundation will throw
Yeah. It's called the
into.
decoy class. I'm kidding.
Yeah, yeah, the D class, the D boys. That's something I
Decoy
forgot
class.
to mention. Yeah, yeah. So,
Okay, I mean,
yep.
yeah, that's interesting. So, yeah, I was about to say Lord Bangsun was really interesting because in a way he was able to kind of like insert all the other SCP stuff into his own like stories.
Hmm?
And it's like you said, even though it's not canon, it kind of is canon in a way because like
Yeah.
now from there other people can create stories or other SCPs based on Connor, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's something you could completely do. You could
Which I
assume
think
that Connor actually exists in the SCP universe and
Yeah,
write a
which I
story
think
around him.
is very cool because it's like literally it's one creation of another story to another creation of another story. It's like
Hmm.
a really a truly a collaboration portal in a way.
Yep.
Didn't realize how cool it was. I don't think I've ever come across like some sort of a like this kind of story tale before, especially like even the community. I've never seen this kind of like community before.
Like this like massive collaboration
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another so there's Volgan, SCP animated, Lord
Mm-hmm.
Bung. There's also a guy named Evan Royalty. Sorry, Evan Royalty.
Mm-hmm.
And this like if you're more into the horror aspect of the SCP universe, or at least like the documentation
Yep.
of SCP, you might want to watch his stuff, Evan
Mm.
Royalty, because he does things basically on the perspective of the MTF. So also another there's so many things to explain about this fucking universe. But the MTF is basically like the military task force of the SCP. Actually, that's what MTF stands for, I think, if I'm mistaken. It's supposed to stand for Military Task Force. And they're
Right.
basically soldiers, like actual professional trained soldiers by the SCP
Yeah.
Foundation to explore or to try to contain certain SCPs.
But they're not decoys.
No, no, they're not. They're not decoys. They're not they're not T classes. They're just actual professional soldiers sent out for first contact, essentially. Like
Oh, for
say,
first contact.
yeah, for
Okay.
first contact.
Okay.
So like if they
Good.
encounter some kind of weird SCP out in the wild, or like in like a jungle or in the mountains, they send the MTFs for to see what's going on.
I mean that makes sense because I feel like
Mhm.
that's kind of like in a way it's like a task force, you know, like you said, task force, like yeah, usually it's a rescue team, like a rescue squad, but this one is like yeah, technically rescuing or retrieving SCPs in a way.
Mm.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I was just about to ask you like if you had any other further links, but other than that, oh, so basically what you're saying is that that one channel about horror, he talks about that with MTF, is it?
Yeah, so it's to me at least it's a lot more horror compared to
The
the other
others.
channels that I mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah, and he mostly does it in this like first person, third person perspective of the NTF.
I
Yeah.
see. Yep. Okay. Oh yeah, yeah, okay. That I mean that would make it horrific because that would be the first time you encounter like an SCP, right? That's
Yep.
why it sounds very horrific. Yep.
Mhm.
But I think going all around though, I would say that in a way, SCP
Mhm.
is kind of like role play if you think about it. Because I feel like in a way when you're creating even the story or the narrative, it's as if like you're part of the SCP Foundation, right? Since like you have to figure out how to contain it or whatever, right? Or how to treat it, for example. So it's like it's as if you're kind of self-inserting yourself into the community, into the story, which is kind of like role playing. And then like I remember you mentioned one of the channel had something to do with like he's the scientist, right? Or not scientist, sorry. He's what?
Like
I
yeah, he's
forgot.
more like a lecturer or like
Yeah.
a
And he's the one
doctor, a
teaching you
professor.
about it, right? So
Yeah.
in a way, it creates like this sort of like role play kind of collaboration as well. And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean I did say that like even the main moderators authors of the website are like they consider themselves to be like O5 staffs, like
Yeah.
high level
Yeah,
ranking
as
like
part of the SCP,
professors.
right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. That's why it's kind of interesting that in a way, yeah, in a way you can consider it as a kind of cultish, kind of. Um, yeah, but I guess like conscious of the time as well. I think before we kind of like wrap everything up for the time being, because I feel like we could actually do another episode just solely just speaking about other SCPs that you find interesting
Yeah,
that you might want to share with me, because I feel like I
because I've read a insane amount, so like.
right, exactly. And I'm like I would love to hear them too instead of me reading it all by myself and looking
I
at the
see. Mhm.
pictures. You know what I'm saying? Because
Okay, okay, fair enough.
I don't think I personally I don't think I would do that. So I'll just hear it from you or like from Lord Bunk. Yeah, but I guess just to wrap it up, since we've already gone also almost an hour just talking
Yep.
about SCP, it's actually fun. I like to discuss about the categories. I'm more interested in the categories than like the stories themselves.
Oh, is it okay? That's
Um,
interesting. Hmm.
yeah, I like just looking. If you notice, I've been analyzing it. Like, oh, but what if it's like this? What if it's like this?
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
For me, it's more fun doing that rather than like having the story itself. And that's why I feel like you are the one that provides me the story, and I'm the one that kind of like tries to compartmentalize all of
Yeah.
it for myself.
And here's the thing, right? Like you
Mm.
consider that interesting, but some people who writes it don't even care. They just think of it as like something that they have to do, right? And that's like yeah, and
Oh,
that's what I think is
lazy
fun.
writing.
No,
Oh,
no, not lazy. I think that's what makes it fun because like some people consider it like, oh, this is like really really important and really fun to read, but for some it might be like, oh, this is not fun. This is not what I really want.
right.
Yeah,
I get what you mean. Like it's there are different aspects for people to like or not dislike. So it's kind of like an open field if you might say, right?
yeah. Anyone can choose what they like and not like.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, just to I guess wrap it up before we end the podcast for today. Before we go, I guess like maybe just one story of yours that like you think is the most memorable or you want to really share with us, or the one that you really think is one of your favorite. Yeah, what story or what SCP is do you have in mind?
There's one. So I mentioned in the beginning of the video or
Mm.
in the beginning of the podcast where it's like there's one particular SCP where you have to torture in order to keep the world safe, essentially.
Yes.
Uh, like I'm explaining this very generalizedly, but like if you read
Yep.
it, actually, it's very interesting how 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 basically the writer of that particular
Mhm.
article
Mhm.
uses your imagination to think of the worst thing. So the thing is that this particular SCP, which is SCP 213, if I'm mistaken the
Can I
exact
see
number.
it? Can I see
Yeah,
it?
yeah. The pictures, I think, from what I can tell, is like very vague anyway.
Okay.
Was it
Go on.
wait 213 or 231? 231, I think.
Oh dear
Let me
Lord. Two
have to
three
look
one
up.
or 213. Don't make me
Oh,
press
231.
something.
Sorry, 231, 231,
Oh,
two three
okay.
one.
Okay. I don't know what 213 is. I don't wanna know.
Yeah, 231.
It, okay. 231 is a guy?
Uh,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
No. It's pretty like weird, yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
pretty weird.
Yeah.
But
As in like his picture is just like blood, right?
yes,
And hand
yeah.
and like
So
an eye at the back?
yeah. So the thing is that the story about 231 is essentially. So I mentioned the Scarlet King previously, right?
Yeah.
So the Scarlet King is supposed to be this like omnipotent, almost uh like immortal god that basically wants to destroy all of humanity and all of life.
Mm-hmm. Can I search that or is it scary?
The Scarlet King, I think you could search
Yeah.
for. I think it's just like
Okay.
red. It's like
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how bad his art, like fan arts, can get. So I don't.
Okay. Yeah, but go on. Uh-huh.
So the Scarlet, yeah. So the Scarlet King is this like main primary antagonist, and SCP-231 is basically instances of his brides from a cult of the Scarlet King.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the cult, they basically impregnated like seven like women, and each time the brides of the Scarlet King gave birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every time
Mm-hmm.
they gave birth, the mother would die, and anything that comes out well, it
Mm-hmm.
causes multiple like breaches essentially.
Breaches.
Yeah, like containment breaches.
Demon breaches. What the fuck does that even
Like
mean?
not demon, containment. So like every time one of
Oh.
the brides gave birth, something terrible
Huh?
happens in the facility. Like a lot of people
Oh
dies
shit.
essentially,
Okay.
so on and so forth,
Yep, yep,
right?
yep.
And this kept happening for each consequential like each consequential bride or mother, right?
Okay. Okay.
Every time the woman gave birth, something happens, and people like like there's people die who or gets killed by either by the SCP itself, like SCP that came out from the mother, or like whatever it is that like maybe one of the scientists had to kill the one of the mother. And this kept happening until the final bride, which is 2317, right? The seventh bride.
Yeah.
And the SCP Foundation has very good reasons to believe that if that final one, if that final uh, bride gave birth, it'll be the end of the world, essentially.
Okay. So 231 is actually not alive yet. Is what you're saying?
No, 231 is essentially a phenomenon, not really a specific thing or object. Because, like I said, SCP can be anything. It could be an object, it could be a person, it could be a
Right.
location, it could be
Right.
a
Okay.
concept, right?
Okay. Okay.
And in this case, the 231 is basically the seven brides, all seven of the
Oh, the
yeah
one are the brides, as in, as in,
yeah
as in, like the kid, like the result, the offspring of the
the
Scarlet
offsprings,
King.
yeah. So
Okay, I see.
and so the thing is that every time each bride gave birth, right? Every
Mm-hmm.
instances that the bride gave birth, it just kept getting worse and worse, right? Like
Okay.
what do I call it? Um, like every like the offsprings
Yeah.
are not human. They're basically like these creatures that can kill people and so on and so forth, right?
Yep. Yep.
And this kept happening until the seventh bride. So all brides are dead. All the six other brides are dead until the seventh one.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And the SCP Foundation believes, for good reasons, that if the final bride gave birth, it'll be the end of the world. It'll summon like some kind of crazy fucking demon that could kill all of
Right.
humanity.
Right. Uh-huh.
And the only way to prevent this, for some reason, like the SCP Foundation seems to found this out by luck or something, is
Uh-huh.
to like to conduct something called the 110 Montauk Procedure.
Okay. 1101 pot.
The Montauk, yeah, the 110 Montauk, Montauk. So this procedure, we have no idea what it consists of.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea what it is the foundation does to the bride, but
Uh-huh.
all we know is that every time the procedure is done, the person who has to do the procedure,
Die.
no, not dies, but like they have to take things like antidepressants or even like memory erasing pills, essentially.
Mm.
Because what they
Okay.
did was so unspeakable and so horrific that they want to forget they have ever done it
Oh,
to
you mean to
begin
the
with.
bride?
Yeah, to the bride, to the seventh bride. Because for some reason,
Oh.
doing that procedure prevents the bride from giving birth.
Oh, okay. So can that means would it be correct to say that the month or the due date of the child is unknown? Like you like I mean a
Yeah, we don't
normal
know.
human it's
Like
9 months,
we have no
right?
idea because it happens randomly as well for each bride.
Right.
Hmm.
So this one is like basically you have to torture the bride,
The
the
bride
last
in order
one.
to prevent the bride from giving birth, essentially, for one reason or another.
Oh, I see. And the thing is nobody knows what the procedure is, but
We
it's
have
some
no
sort of
idea what the
torture
procedure
from the
is, but what
foundation.
we do know is that whoever does it
Mm-hmm.
usually commits suicide afterwards or has to take like memory erasing pills because for what they did to the bride,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
like is so like horrific and so unspeakable that they want to forget it altogether. And like
And the bride is still okay though. Like she's
no,
still
the
alive.
bride is suffering. The bride is like in pure misery. Like she's in pure pain.
Oh.
Yeah. but we
Wow,
don't
that's kind of
know.
sad.
Yeah, that's kind of fucked up. But we don't know what it is.
I
We have no
see.
idea what it is. But the thing, the reason why this is like one of my favorite personal stories
Mm, mm, mm.
is because it uses your imagination. You have no idea what it is, but you can imagine what they did to her.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's
it
true.
makes and it makes the monster not the monster, not the offspring, but you personally, you yourself.
Oh shit. Okay, you're right.
Right?
Cause I did think of something and I'm like, that's bad. And then when you said it is my imagination, I'm like, holy shit. Yeah, it did come from my imagination because it
Yeah,
wasn't
it
anyone who
means
told me how
you
it looked.
like it kind of makes it so like whatever like you are willing to do whatever evil thing that is in your head to prevent world destruction essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I get what
So
you mean. 'Cause I was
so
like, when I was
that's
thinking about
when
that.
I first read this I was like I didn't understand it, but once I read it again it's like oh I see. I am the
Yeah,
bad
yeah, you're
guy.
right. Because it feels like you thinking about it, and you wanna even if you wanna share it, it's like you don't feel good sharing it because it's like so vile. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But then if you
So
think it further, it makes it so that whatever it is that you thought of, you are
yeah.
willing to do that heinous thing to
Oh, that one I'm
yeah,
not sure because I wasn't
that's
thinking
it.
until that point, but I was just thinking about like what was the horrific action, and that even made me already feel like shit. Like
Yeah.
it really made me feel like fuck. I shouldn't have think of that.
But
I
then you
shouldn't have
thought
thought of
about it
that.
and now you're like it's like you are willing to do that to protect like the
Am I
world
though?
essentially.
Am I though? I don't know, but yeah, yeah. I get what you're saying. I get
Yeah,
why it's kind of like fucked up in its own
this
way.
it's incredibly fucked up, but it's kind of the reason why it's my favorite like SCP article.
Hmm. Interesting. Makes sense.
Hmm.
Huh. All right. Well, I guess I mean yeah, for me I think that's probably it for this episode, but do you have any other additions that you want to sorry, that you want to mention or talk about before, we get to
Uh, Not really.
before we go
I'll probably
to
just mention specifically like the SCP Foundation, right? The
yeah.
SCP universe is so freaking vast, and
Hmm.
there's so many different resources to find. Like
Yep, yep,
there's like the subreddits, there's the Instagram. They have like some kind of official Instagram, I think.
yep.
Twitter, DeviantArt. If you want to look at any of the fan arts that's mentioned,
Yeah.
because like I think that because obviously um with such a huge overarching universe there's probably like tons and tons of different like arts like fan
Yep,
arts for
yep.
this so
And I feel like even if you're not an artist, you can try to be a drawer. And even if you can't be a drawer, you can be an artist or something else. And like because it's YouTube as well, there's so many things you can
yeah
do
there's
and
so
play
many
around
things
with
you
the with
can you
the
can you
with
can
the
try to
story, right?
consume essentially yeah.
Yep, yep. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, it is open for anyone or anyone who's interested, you know.
Yep.
But I guess for key takeaways, what would your key takeaways be for this episode today?
My key takeaway I don't really have one because like I said this is mostly just me talking and ranting off about
Mm, mm,
this little fandom corner of the universe
yep.
like I think any key takeaway is probably don't get intimidated too much. Just like anything else I mentioned before, don't get too intimidated by the universe. If people
Yep.
say so and so about SCP, like oh this has to be like this, and so just ignore them because that's not true. Anything works in
Yeah, nothing is
SCP
canon,
universe.
right? Yep, yep,
Nothing is canon, but everything is. So it's like up to you. If you
yep,
want,
yep,
if you like this particular theory, you can take it.
yep,
Um, there's other sources as well. So I mentioned YouTube, right? I mentioned YouTube. I
yep.
mentioned the SCP website. There's also a long, relatively long running comic series.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who it is by who. Like I don't know who it
Mm-hmm.
is that drew the art for this.
Mm.
But what I know is like it's a Japanese artist, right? Because there's actually a pretty extensive Japanese and Russian community for SCP.
I see. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense in a way why it's
In
from
a
there.
way,
Yep,
yeah.
yep, yep, yep. I
So try to look into something called oversimplified SCP. That's if you really want the super super TLDR of every SCP that I mentioned today.
Hmm.
It's most likely there, except maybe some of the short stories because they only
The
cover
lore kind of
the
yeah.
very basic articles.
Yep, yep,
So things like the Clockwork Factory or the Heart to Destroy Reptile, the
yep,
Critical Tomatoes that I mentioned is also very early on. Hand Drawn Cassie. Those are less
yeah.
like the names. I'm not mentioning the numbers, but like if you want like the very super TLDR oversimplified, SCP has them.
Hmm.
Yep, and I also highly recommend um to look for something called the things Dr. Bright is not allowed to do at Foundation because that covers the more comedic side of the SCP universe.
Hmm.
Because like I said, not everything in the SCP universe is like horror based. There's also a lot of
Yeah,
like joke.
that one I might be catered. That one might be more catered to me. I feel because other than all these ones that are like very serious, I prefer
Uh,
the one that something to do with the tomatoes, the punny tomatoes.
yeah, I see. In that case,
I
then
think
I
that was
highly
the one that was.
recommend you look into anything with like J behind the number of the SCP.
With the what?
So like SCP, there's a number and then dash J. So
Oh, SCPJ.
yeah, no, so it's SCP. So any number, so SCP dash number dash J.
Huh? Oh,
Because
that's where the funny
yeah, so
comedy.
anything like for example SCP 420J, for example.
Oh, okay. So
So
something to do with the
420J
author.
is so any because anything that has a J at the back, right?
Uh-huh.
Anything that has a J in the back means joke. So it's a joke SCP.
Yeah,
It's just like
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
for fun, just for shits and gigs.
Yeah, I think that's
Uh,
that's my turf right there.
in the case for SCP-420J, it's basically like a
Is
very
it a weed thing?
powerful
Oh, I
weed
fucking knew
cigar,
it. Yep, I fucking knew it. Of
and
course, it has to be
it
weed.
has
What
to
do
be,
you think?
yeah, and I think it's even in the confinement series as well. If you look for it, it's there somewhere. There's
Okay, I'll look into it.
SCP-420J, and then there's also the uh like I mentioned, like there's a very like significant Russian and Japanese fan base for the SCP universe.
Yeah.
Those specific ones, like if you want to know which SCPs are specifically written by the Russian community or the Japanese community, there's also
Mm-hmm.
the subtext of so SCP dash number dash RU. That one is Russian. And then
Mm-hmm.
for the
And
Japanese
then
one is SCP dash blank dash JP.
right.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, makes sense. Yep, and I guess my key takeaway is probably just, I mean, I'm new to this, so I don't really know, but my key takeaway is basically I'm kind of scared of the most most of SCPs probably, except for the one in J and the tomatoes.
Mhm.
Um, but I really do like the fact that like there's so much thought put into at least like the community and even like just the basis of the existence of the community or even the story in itself or even the what is it, the concept in itself is so much thought because like you already have so many like categories that you can look into, and I'm just more of the idea of like I like to play with the categories in terms of like, oh, if it's like this what happens, if it's like this what happens,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's what I think is interesting about SCP, not the stories probably but how it works as like one another in a way.
Oh yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. Those ones. Yep, that's fine. If you really want to, so in the SCP Foundation main website, if you really want to look into more of the side stories,
yeah,
they're called SCP Tales.
what is that?
They're basically like the side stories. For example, so the one that I mentioned, which is like the young man.
Mm-hmm.
The young man is
Oh, okay, yep, yep,
yeah.
yep.
The young man is
So it's
also
not it's
in
not the
those
main
tales.
SCP, yeah, but it's
Yeah,
also kind of
it's
like
not directly on the SCP article, like for example SCP-106. It's not written
yeah,
there,
yeah.
but it's
It's kind
there.
of it's kind of like
Like
an OVA in a way of an
yeah, to
anime.
some degree, yeah. It's kind of like it's like a side story.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
like if you want to know kind of what kind of
Yep.
stories other artists or other authors have made regarding this one
Mhm.
character, you can look for that up.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was about to just wrap it up. I before I wrap it up though, I just want to tell you something about SCP-231. I didn't realize the picture until I did. At first, I thought it was just like some sort of like some blurry pictures, right? But now I realized that the hand actually connects to a face, and the face is actually screaming in pain. And then that's when I realized it's actually a birth position. And I was like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
I did not realize that. I just thought it was some blurry picture, of
Yep.
like some fucked up meat or something, but no, it's actually a person giving birth. Fuck.
If you want the less horrific fan arts of the
Yeah.
SCP, the most famous one is by someone called Sunset Parallax. Oh, Sunny Parallax. Sorry, Sunny Parallax.
Sunny parallel. Okay.
Yeah, Sunny Parallax does like these like black and white, very minimalist art of each SCP.
Mm.
Like you don't know, you like if you look at it, you have no idea what the fuck the art is supposed to signify.
Mm-hmm.
But once you read afterwards, you're like, oh, now I understand. So that's one of the things. Yep.
Okay, maybe I'll
And
look into that.
and whoever Sunny Parallax or Sunny Clockwork is they've basically done like almost all of it, I think. Almost all of
Okay.
the different SCBs, like art wise.
Oh, yeah. It looks
Or
like
the
some
very
sort of a carrot type picture in a way. Yep, yep.
yeah, almost to some
Okay.
degree. Yeah, it's very like minimalist, very
Mystical-ish kind of thing. Yep.
yep.
All right. Okay. So I guess like yeah, it's been great listening about SCP. Like in all honesty though, after talking to you, after you explained it to me in a more structured way than before, it makes more sense now to me than ever. Like if somebody asked me what SCP was, I'd probably be able to kind of explain it better instead of like it's like creepy pasta, but it's not. So yeah, thanks for explaining what SCP is and giving me some examples and some memorable and some ones I don't want to remember. But yeah, if you guys want us to further talk or like discuss more about SCP lores or even certain SCPs, just let us know. Let Leonard know specifically because I wouldn't care. But I would be open to hearing about it, not researching
Yes.
about
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna show you any of the horrific
I mean, you
art.
can. I won't, but you'll have to tell me how to look into it. Just like I'll just imagine it by my own like brain, with my own
Oh
brain.
yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Or I'll just
Yeah.
give you like the parallax art about it,
Yep.
the
Yep.
Sunny Clockwork art. Yeah.
Yep. So I guess just thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoy this kind of like spooky but not really spooky, scientific but not really scientific, paradoxical kind of storyline analysis between Leonard and I, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Have a great week farming, Leonard.